I want to call off the engagement." Willow stood in the middle of my office and said it bluntly. I didn't look up. The tip of my pen paused for a second before I only replied with one word. Reason. I've fallen in love with someone else. The heir fell silent. I was the president of Wang Corporation, and she was the heir of Liu Corporation. The marriage alliance between our two families had always been considered the inevitable outcome by everyone in our circle. Yet she chose the moment when I was signing a merger agreement to tell me she had fallen for someone else. Who? Makoto. I finished signing the last word, closed the document, and said, "Okay." She froze. "That's your reaction?" I added calmly. "The engagement is off. You can explain it to both our fathers." Her face turned pale. "George, you really don't care at all." I looked up at her. "You've already made your choice." She stared at me, her voice turning cold. "I'm getting the marriage certificate with him today. Congratulations." She turned and walked to the door, but before leaving, she looked back at me. "You won't try to get revenge, will you?" I smiled. "Capital never seeks revenge. I'm just withdrawing my investment." 3 days later, she registered her marriage. That night, I held a board meeting. All 3 of Liu Corporation's core investments were pulled out. The banks began tightening their credit lines. It was the first time she called me to question me. "Are you crazy?" "A business decision." She was silent for a long time before asking again. "What exactly are you trying to do?" I looked at the glass curtain wall outside the window and replied, "I'm just stepping away." She didn't know. What I walked away from was never just the engagement. Chapter 1. When Willow Liu walked in wearing 18-centimeter stilettos, I was signing a merger agreement. She didn't knock. The sharp sound of her heels striking the floor came one after another, as if she deliberately wanted to remind me of her presence. The secretary couldn't stop her. Since we were children, she had never needed an appointment to enter my office. I was the current CEO of Wang Corporation and the only son of the Wang family. She was the heir of Liu Corporation, the only daughter of the Liu family. Our two families had worked together for more than 20 years. Willow and I had practically grown up at the same conference table. After signing the final page, I only raised my head when the pen left the paper. She stood in front of my desk, posture straight, makeup flawless, her red lips pressed together, as if she was waiting for me to speak first. I said nothing. I simply handed the documents to my assistant. "Reason?" I asked. She paused, seemingly surprised that this was the only thing I asked. "I've fallen in love with someone else." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was certain. The pen tip stopped on the paper for a moment. Only a moment. I closed the document, placed it inside the signing case beside me, and looked at her. "All right," I said. "The engagement is off. Tell your father and mine." The room suddenly became quiet. The expression she had been holding together cracked slightly. She had probably prepared many things to say. Maybe she thought I would ask who he was, how long it had been going on, or whether she had considered the businesses between our families. Perhaps she had even prepared for me to lose my temper, but I didn't. I even stood up and opened the door for her. "Anything else?" I asked. She stared at me for a few seconds. There was unwillingness in her eyes, along with confusion. "George, you really don't care at all." I looked at her and said, "An engagement involves both sides. Since you've already decided, I respect it." Her breathing clearly became heavier. "Did you stop liking me a long time ago?" She said it softly. I didn't answer. Words like and love had never been worth much in families like ours. The year we got engaged, she was 20 and I was 22. The engagement banquet had 50 tables. Financial media competed to report on it, calling it a powerful alliance between two major families. Everyone believed we would get married sooner or later. Even I had accepted that path by default. She had grown up being spoiled. The head of the Liu family had only one daughter and gave her everything she wanted. She was used to everyone revolving around her, used to standing at the center, used to others considering the consequences for her. But I was different. After taking over the company at 24, I had to calculate every investment myself and negotiate every deal myself. The Wang family gave me the position, but they never made decisions for me. So when she said she had fallen in love with someone else, my first reaction wasn't anger. It was assessment. Assessing the impact, assessing the risks, assessing the cost. She remained standing at the doorway. "His name is Makoto," she suddenly added. I nodded. "Got it." Her expression changed. "You're not going to ask what kind of person he is. Since he's your choice, I assume you know him well." My tone remained calm when I said it. She suddenly laughed, a little coldly. "You're still the same, always so rational that it's annoying." "Thank you." She looked at me for a while, as if trying to find a crack in my expression. Unfortunately, she found nothing. I had known since childhood that emotions were the least valuable thing, especially at the negotiation table. Chapter 2. She turned and left. Her heels struck the floor harder than when she came in. The moment the door closed, I stood there for a few seconds before returning to my chair. The glass curtain wall across from me reflected my face, calm, almost unfamiliar. My assistant knocked and walked in carefully. CEO Wang. Miss Liu. She. Notify the legal department. Prepare a statement regarding the termination of the engagement. Keep the wording objective. Yes. He hesitated for a moment before asking. What about the partnership? I looked at the documents on my desk. The funding for Liu Corporation's 3 core projects currently came from Wang Corporation. If the engagement ended, the partnership would inevitably need to be reevaluated. Don't make any changes for now, I said. Understood. After my assistant left, the office fell silent again. My phone vibrated. Willow had sent me a message. Are you really that unfazed? I glanced at it but didn't reply. At 8 that night, I was still in the conference room discussing a new project with the investment department. When the meeting ended, my phone notified me that someone had updated their social media. It was her. In the photo, she was leaning against a man's chest. The man wore a dark suit, with sharp features and a confident, arrogant smile. Makoto. I had met him once at a business banquet. Back then, he was only a rising entrepreneur. His company wasn't large, but he was good with words and skilled at seizing opportunities. The caption contained only one sentence. Finally, no need to hide anymore. The comments were lively. People sent their blessings and teased them. There were even people asking about me. I clicked on the photo and zoomed in. She was smiling sweetly, sweeter than when she attended events with me. I pressed like, then exited. My assistant happened to come in with some documents and saw my phone screen. His expression changed. CEO Wang. I interrupted him. Give me the documents. He handed them over, hesitating as if he wanted to say something. I flipped through 2 pages, signed them, and only then spoke. From now on, don't report Miss Liu's personal updates to me. Understood. The office lights went out one by one. The night settled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It wasn't that I had never considered the possibility that she would leave. I just never expected her to do it this way. But since she had already chosen her path, it was time for me to make my choice as well. The end of a relationship was something between 2 people. A business partnership involved 2 companies. I would never gamble the future of the entire group because of a relationship. Nor would I change my own pace because of her decision. I picked up my phone and sent my father a message. The engagement is over. We'll discuss it tomorrow. He replied quickly with one word. Okay. No blame. No emotion. That was the Wang family's way. The next morning, people in financial circles were already discussing Willow Liu and Makoto Ito. The rumors spread quickly. Some speculated that the relationship between the Liu and Wang families would fall apart. Others guessed that the partnership would change. I muted the group chat, then drove to the company. The sunlight outside the car window was bright. Suddenly, I realized something. From the day we got engaged, everyone had assumed we would stay together until the end. Only she had chosen to get off the journey early. That was fine. At least it happened before marriage. I didn't need to deal with more complicated relationships. I didn't need to divide anything. Everything was still within my control. When the elevator doors opened, I had already returned to my usual state. Calm, clear-headed, focused. The secretary handed me my schedule for the day. I took it and glanced at it. Arrange a board meeting at 3 this afternoon. She froze. So soon? Yeah. Some things shouldn't be delayed. Since she had made the relationship public, I should make my stance public as well. I walked into my office, pulled out the chair, and sat down. The desk was neat, with documents organized into separate categories. Outside the window, the glass curtain wall reflected the entire city. I looked at the mirror-like building. It would not change direction just because someone left. Neither would capital. Feelings could end. Partnerships needed to be recalculated. My phone vibrated again. It was Willow. Why did you like it? I stared at the message for a few seconds, then replied with one word. Congratulations. After sending it, I turned my phone to silent mode. The meeting materials were already prepared. I opened the first page. From this moment on, I was no longer her fiancé. I was the person in charge of Wang Corporation, and she was only the heir of a business partner. As for whether love was worth it or not, that was her choice. I had my own path to walk. Chapter 3. 3 days later, I heard the news in the conference room. Not from her. The legal department handed me a document regarding the changes, and casually mentioned, Liu Corporation completed the marriage registration today. Makoto has become the first legally recognized partner of Miss Liu. My hand stopped turning the page for a second. Got it, I said. The meeting continued. At 10:30 in the morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed, Uncle Liu. I answered. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds before he finally spoke. George, I'm sorry, your uncle has let you down. His voice was hoarse. I stood up and walked to the window. This was her decision. She's too reckless. Willow's father suppressed his anger. She went to register the marriage today without even discussing it with the family. I didn't respond. He continued. The partnership between our two families, it won't be affected, right? Finally, he got to the point. Business is business. The engagement is the engagement. My tone remained steady. However, I will reevaluate the projects. The other end went silent for 2 seconds. Are you planning to withdraw? The funds need to be rearranged. George, don't act impulsively. I don't make impulsive decisions. I hung up. When I returned to the conference table, I called in the head of the investment department. Pull up the files for the 3 core investments in Liu Corporation. He froze slightly. CEO Wang, why are you suddenly looking into these? There will be a board meeting tonight. The atmosphere in the conference room immediately changed. David, the investment director, had worked with me for years. He knew when I was truly about to make a move. He lowered his voice. Is this because of Miss Liu? Because of capital efficiency? I didn't elaborate. At 3 in the afternoon, the board meeting started on time. More than a dozen directors took their seats. The former chairman of Wang Corporation, my father, sat beside the main seat. He didn't speak. He only looked at me. I turned on the projector. First item, Liu Corporation's commercial complex project. It occupies 4 billion in capital, and the return cycle has been extended by 6 months. Second item, the new energy partnership. It occupies 2.5 billion in capital, and current returns are below expectations. Third item, the real estate acquisition. The risk rating has been raised. I paused. Based on the overall assessment, I recommend withdrawing our core funds. Some people in the conference room frowned. If we withdraw now, outsiders will interpret it as retaliation. Interpretation is their concern. I looked at the director who spoke. Capital return is ours. David added. If we withdraw, our cash flow will improve significantly. An older director sighed. The Wang and Liu families have been connected for many years. Isn't this moving too quickly? I turned to the final page. Capital has never been driven by emotions. The moment those words fell, the entire conference room became silent. My father finally spoke. Vote. The result came quickly. The majority approved. I signed the resolution documents on the spot. The withdrawal process began. When the meeting ended, my father stopped me. Are you clear about what you're doing? Completely. He looked at me for a moment and said nothing else. At 7 that evening, Willow called. I looked at the screen and answered. George, you held a board meeting today. Yes, the withdrawal was your decision. The board's resolution. She took a deep breath. Do you really think this is necessary? Business decision. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. You're doing this because of me. The financial data of Liu Corporation is in the report. You can check it yourself. Her voice tightened. You know, I just got married, and the company is going through a transition. If you pull the funding now, do you know how the outside world will view it? I am only responsible for Wang Corporation. After I said that, she fell completely silent. After a long while, she whispered, You've changed, so have you. The call ended. Less than an hour later, Makoto took the initiative to ask me to meet. The location was a private club in the city center. I arrived on time. He looked even sharper than he did in the photo. His eyes filled with provocation. CEO Wang, you move pretty fast. He spoke first. My efficiency has always been good. He smiled. You're just unwilling to accept this, aren't you? I picked up my teacup. You're overthinking. Once Liu Corporation loses the funding, the market will question her judgment. His tone carried a hint of sarcasm. You're trying to embarrass her. I looked at him. I withdrew the investment because the returns failed to meet expectations. You're really going to pretend this is just business? Otherwise. He leaned back in his chair and continued. George, people like you love pretending to be calm. People like us. I looked at him indifferently. Yes, acting like you don't care on the surface, while making moves behind everyone's backs. I put down my cup. If you think there's a funding problem, you can cover it yourself. Chapter 4. His expression changed slightly. The 3 projects of Liu Corporation were massive in scale. They were not something his current company could easily take over. I will, he said. Then I wish you success. I stood up. He stood as well. Don't you want to know why she chose me? I looked at him and replied. It doesn't matter. He stared at me for a few seconds, then suddenly sneered. People like you are too calculating. You don't know how to live. I didn't respond. When I walked out of the club, the night wind was cold. The moment the car door closed, I received a call from David. CEO Wang. News of the funding withdrawal has reached Liu Corporation. The banks have started re-evaluating their credit lines. Follow the procedures. Yes. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a moment. It wasn't revenge. It was simply stopping my support. Liu Corporation had expanded too quickly in recent years. Many of their projects relied on our funding to keep moving forward. Once that support was removed, the pressure naturally became visible. The next morning, Liu Corporation's stock price fluctuated noticeably. The investment department reported to me, the market is taking a wait-and-see approach. Continue monitoring. At noon, Willow's father called again. George, are you forcing the Liu family? I'm not targeting anyone. You withdrew funding, and now the banks are nervous. Even our partners are hesitating. The risks existed from the beginning. He was silent for a moment before asking, do you really have no feelings left for Willow? I paused for a second before replying. Feelings and capital are two different things. A long sigh came from the other end. She couldn't answer the questions during the board meeting today. That's her responsibility. After hanging up, I returned to the conference room. The team had already prepared new investment directions. I pointed at the screen. Move this portion of the funds into the Technology Park project. CEO Wang. Isn't the timing too rushed? Start the project today. David looked at me and nodded. At 4 in the afternoon, news came out. Makoto publicly stated that Wang Corporation's withdrawal was an emotional decision. I looked at the forwarded report. I didn't respond. David asked, should we clarify? No need, but the market will keep speculating. Speculation won't change cash flow. I stood up and continued. Refine the project advancement plan further. Phones kept ringing in the office. Partners were asking about the situation. My standard response was always, Wang Corporation adjusted its investment structure based on business evaluations. At 9 that night, Willow appeared downstairs at my company. She didn't make an appointment. The security guard called upstairs to confirm. I allowed her to come up. When she entered my office, she was wearing a simple suit. There was no trace of newlywed happiness on her face. Are you satisfied now? She spoke first. Satisfied with what? Liu Corporation has spent the entire day explaining the funding issues. They're explaining the data. She stared at me. You knew the banks would tighten their terms. I replied. Banks evaluate risks. They don't need me to teach them how. Her breathing became heavier. You just wanted to make me look bad. If you think this is humiliation, then it means there is a problem with the project itself. She froze. You weren't like this before. Before, I wasn't the chairman. She opened her mouth but said nothing. The air became tense. Then she suddenly asked in a low voice. You really don't feel anything at all? I looked at her. You're already married. The moment those words fell, her face turned pale for a second. A few seconds later, she turned and left. This time, she wasn't wearing 18-centimeter heels. Her footsteps were so light they were almost impossible to hear. The door closed. I looked at the withdrawal documents on my desk. The process was already more than halfway complete. The funds were gradually returning. The night pressed against the glass windows. The city was brightly lit. And on Liu Corporation's side, the lights were still on as well. Only this time, I was no longer the person standing behind them. Chapter 5. The withdrawal process entered its third day. More than half of the funds had already been recovered. The financial director placed the report on my desk and said, CEO Wang, our cash flow has improved significantly. There's no pressure moving forward with the new projects. I finished reviewing the data and only nodded. At the same time, updates from the other side were coming in. The banks had begun reassessing Liu Corporation's credit limits, and several partners had delayed signing their original contracts. It wasn't a betrayal. It was hesitation. And hesitation itself was a sign of the market's direction. At 10 in the morning, David knocked and entered. 2 suppliers from Liu Corporation are requesting early settlement. I asked, what do the contract terms say? A 3-month payment period. Then follow the contract. He nodded and left. I knew the pressure had only just begun to show. Liu Corporation had expanded too quickly in recent years. Commercial complexes, new energy projects, and real estate acquisitions were all being pushed forward at the same time. The numbers on paper looked impressive, but their cash flow had always been stretched thin. Before this, Wang Corporation's funding had been supporting them from the side, keeping the risks under control. Now that support was gone, the cracks naturally began to appear. In the afternoon, the secretary informed me, Miss Liu is here. I stopped writing. Let her in. When the door opened, I looked up. She was wearing flat shoes today. Her hair was slightly messy, and her makeup was not as flawless as before. That aura of always being above everyone else had faded considerably. She walked to my desk but didn't sit down. We need to talk. Go ahead. She took a deep breath. The banks are tightening Liu Corporation's credit lines. You know that, right? I've heard. Several suppliers are demanding early payments. That's an internal issue for your company. She looked at me. Anger suppressed deep in her eyes. Does it really have to be like this? I closed the document and continued. You made your choice. I'm making mine. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the desk. Do you know how difficult things are for me right now? You are now Liu Corporation's vice president, and Makoto's wife. The words left her speechless. Don't make it sound so cold. Positions and identities are cold by nature. She stared at me for a few seconds before finally sitting down. George, our families have worked together for so many years. You withdrew the funds with one decision. How do you think the outside world will see this? The outside world won't fill your cash flow gap for you. Her breathing stopped for a moment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I was only stating facts. She was silent for a while before softening her tone. We can adjust the terms and give Wang Corporation a higher return ratio. The project risks haven't decreased. We can add more collateral. Collateral is an asset, not the future. She finally had nothing left to say. I could see the anxiety in her eyes. It was the first time someone who had never truly faced setbacks growing up was experiencing the consequences of a chain reaction. What about Makoto? I asked. Her expression stiffened. He's negotiating financing. How is it going? She didn't answer. The answer was already written on her face. I stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped by the window. Liu Corporation needs cash flow right now, not emotions. She stood up as well, lowering her voice. Do you really want to see us fail? I turned back to look at her. I'm not targeting you, but this is the result. The result comes from the structure. She bit her lip. You wouldn't have treated me like this before. You weren't standing against me. The moment I said that, her eyes suddenly turned red. She quickly looked away and asked, are you really leaving me no room at all? The board has already made its decision. Then you can push for another resolution. There is no reason to. She remained silent for a long time. Her voice was almost inaudible. George, are you really going to be this ruthless? I didn't answer. She stood there, as if waiting for me to deny it, but I didn't. A few seconds later, she turned and left. The sound of the door closing was very soft. I returned to my seat and opened the next document. At 8 that night, news about Liu Corporation's board meeting reached me. Several shareholders had raised objections during the meeting. The funding gap was growing, and project returns were being delayed. Some demanded a reduction in investment scale, while others suggested bringing in new strategic capital. Willow's father slammed his hand on the table during the meeting. The board failed to reach a consensus. After David finished reporting, he lowered his voice. They're already in internal chaos, I said. Continue monitoring the data. Yes. Chapter 6. The next morning, I saw a familiar face in the conference room. Makoto. He didn't make an appointment and directly requested a meeting through business channels. I had someone arrange a conference room. When he sat down, his expression was colder than the last time. CEO Wang, don't you think you've gone too far with Liu Corporation? I replied. Adjusting investments isn't going too far. After you withdrew the funds, the banks immediately followed. Banks look at financial reports, not people's expressions. He leaned back in his chair and continued. You're making things very difficult for Willow. She already made her choice. He narrowed his eyes. Are you betting that she won't be able to hold on? I don't gamble. He stared at me, as if trying to find a crack in my expression. We can discuss a new form of cooperation. What can you offer? He paused. Future resource integration. Specifics. We have channels in the new energy sector. Contracts. He fell silent. I pushed a financial analysis report toward him. This is Liu Corporation's current funding gap. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. You investigated quickly. This is public information. He closed the document and spoke again. George, are you too rational? Rationality is what keeps people alive longer. He laughed once, clearly displeased. The way you're acting now will only push Liu Corporation toward other investors. The market has always existed. He stood up. Just wait and see. I didn't stop him. Not long after he left, David came in. Liu Corporation's internal shareholders are starting to demand that management provide a concrete solution, I said. They'll look for funding. Makoto's company isn't large enough. Then we'll see what terms they can negotiate. At 3 in the afternoon, I received a call from Willow's father. His voice sounded noticeably exhausted. George, some people on the board are proposing that I step down. That's your internal decision. They say I failed to manage my daughter properly. I didn't respond to that. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. Do you really have no attachment to the past at all? What I care about is risk control. He gave a bitter laugh. You're harsher than I was back then, I replied. The market is harsher than it was back then. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair. The sunlight outside was bright. Traffic flowed endlessly below. Everything seemed normal. In the evening, Willow appeared at my company again. This time, she didn't come straight upstairs. She waited in the lobby. When I went downstairs, I saw her sitting on the sofa, gripping her phone in her hand. She looked exhausted. She looked up when she saw me. Can we talk one more time? Go ahead. The board is forcing my father. That's the shareholders' right. She continued. You know where the root cause is. The root cause is the capital structure. She stared at me, her voice trembling slightly. Makoto said he can hold on for a while, but the banks won't give us enough time. That's a problem they need to solve. She suddenly raised her voice. Can't you just slow down? People in the lobby turned to look. I lowered my voice. Willow, this is a company, not a family. She froze. A few seconds later, her shoulders sank. I never thought things would become like this. Choices always come with a price. She looked at me. There was confusion in her eyes, along with unwillingness to accept it. If back then I hadn't. I interrupted her. There's no point talking about that now. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath before continuing. Are you really unwilling to show any mercy? I already did. She looked up. When? The day you told me. She froze. I turned around. I still have a meeting. She didn't follow me. The glass doors slowly closed, separating her from the inside. At 10 that night, Liu Corporation held another board meeting. This time, some shareholders clearly proposed replacing the management team. Willow's father lost his temper during the meeting. This marriage was ruined by your own choice. The words quickly reached me. I put down my phone and made no comment. The office was filled only with the sound of keyboard typing. The data was still updating. The situation was still changing. I didn't interfere, nor did I step back. Chapter 7. After the dispute at Liu Corporation's board meeting, the market's direction became even clearer. Two banks reassessed Liu Corporation's overall credit limits. The available credit was reduced, and the pace of lending slowed. Several partnerships that had already reached the final stage were paused right before signing. I no longer contacted Willow Liu. On Wang Corporation's side, the new projects were progressing smoothly. The bidding for the technology park land was approaching, and the allocation of funds had already been completed. But I knew very well that things would not end here. Makoto would not sit around and wait. A person like him would never admit defeat, nor would he admit that his judgment was wrong. David placed a document on my desk. CEO Wang. This is Makoto's capital history over the past few years. I opened the file. Several years ago, he entered the core management level of a previous company through marriage. The marriage lasted 2 years. After completing the integration of corporate resources, he withdrew completely. After that, he founded his own company. The scale was not particularly large, but his financing strategy was extremely aggressive. He repeatedly used endorsements from partners to amplify his market influence. His style is very aggressive, David said. Not aggressive. He's leveraging other people's power. David nodded. Right now, the power he's leveraging is Liu Corporation. I said nothing. The brand value and asset scale of Liu Corporation were much greater than any bargaining chip he had used before, and Willow was the key piece. That night, there was a business banquet. The organizer was a local industrial investment fund. Several leading companies would be attending. I originally planned to have the vice president attend instead, but I changed my mind in the end. Some things were more effective when said face to face. The banquet was held on the top floor of a hotel in the city center. The lighting was soft, and glasses clinked as people exchanged conversations. The moment I entered, I saw Makoto. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit, surrounded by several investors. His tone was confident, and his gestures were full of pride as he spoke. Willow stood beside him. Her smile was polite, but she no longer had the relaxed expression she used to have. When she saw me, her gaze clearly froze for a moment. Makoto followed her line of sight and looked over. The corners of his lips lifted. A few minutes later, he walked over himself. CEO Wang. Long time no see. We just met a few days ago. I raised my glass slightly. He smiled. That wasn't a formal occasion. Is this one? Consider it an exchange. He stood across from me and lowered his voice. You've been making some big moves recently, I said. Capital adjustment. Liu Corporation is under a lot of pressure now. That's the current market environment. He looked at me and suddenly asked, aren't you just jealous? People nearby turned their attention toward us. I smiled. Jealous of what? She chose me. I lifted my glass and gently swirled the wine. I've already left the game. You've only just entered. His smile froze. You think you've walked away cleanly? At least the accounts are clear. His eyes turned cold. The problems at Liu Corporation weren't created in a single day. Then they need to be sorted out even more. He stared at me for several seconds before suddenly lowering his voice. Just wait and see. See what? See who can take over this situation. Good luck. I didn't stay any longer. I turned around and went to speak with another investor. Halfway through the conversation, I noticed Willow standing not far away. Her expression was complicated. She didn't come over. Chapter 8. Before the banquet ended, I received a message from David. 2 partners have postponed signing agreements with Liu Corporation. I replied with one word. Got it. The next morning, the news became clearer. Makoto's company's financing plan had run into trouble. One of the investors who had originally promised to participate suddenly withdrew. The reason was simple. Liu Corporation's cash flow was under pressure, and the risk level had increased. The impact spread. When David came in to report, his tone was calm. They originally wanted to use Liu Corporation as an endorsement. Now that endorsement is losing its value, the market reaction is normal. Makoto is urgently negotiating new financing. I flipped through the documents in my hand and asked, can he get it? The terms will be very harsh. That afternoon, Willow sent me a message. Do you have time to meet? I didn't reply immediately. Half an hour later, she appeared downstairs at the company. This time, she hadn't carefully dressed up. A simple white shirt. The ends of her hair were slightly messy. I let her come upstairs. After entering my office, she didn't exchange greetings and went straight to the point. You investigated him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, I said. It's public information. You gave his past information to investors. No. She stared at me. Her expression complicated, but they all know now. Investors will investigate on their own. She was silent for a moment before speaking. His previous marriage was just a business partnership. I know. You knew. I know now. Her voice tightened slightly. Did you see through him long ago? I look at data. What about people? People are reflected in data as well. She suddenly laughed. A bitter laugh. I used to think you were too cold. Now I realize you can calculate everything, not feelings. The moment those words left my mouth, we both paused. She turned her face away. He's under a lot of pressure now. So are you. She looked at me and asked. You're not worried at all that we'll turn things around? That depends on your ability. She bit her lower lip. You really don't feel anything. I have no right to interfere. She remained silent for a long time before continuing. He asked me to come find you. For what? To discuss cooperation. What conditions? For Wang Corporation to reinvest. I smiled. Why? She lowered her voice. We can give you more shares, I replied. The risk hasn't changed. We can restructure the projects. The funding gap has already appeared. She looked up at me. You're really going to just watch him get surrounded by the market? He chose this path. Her voice trembled slightly. You really don't hate me. Hate won't solve cash flow problems. She froze. A few seconds later, she asked. If I hadn't left back then, would you have treated Liu Corporation like this? No. Her face turned pale. So it was still because of me. It was because the decision structure changed. She suddenly fell silent. The pride on her face slowly shattered. She walked to the window and looked outside. He told me he could hold on. Then let him hold on. She turned around. For the first time, hesitation appeared in her eyes. George, have you ever thought that maybe he approached me because? She stopped before finishing. I looked at her. You're only thinking of that now. She lowered her head. The office was completely silent. After standing there for a while, she said softly. He came to me because he wanted to prove he was stronger than you. Strength isn't something you say. She looked up. Then why didn't you directly make a move? I already withdrew. She stared at me, as if she was only now realizing the weight behind those words. Withdrawn. No longer participating. No longer taking responsibility. She stood there silently for a long time. His company's cash flow is also starting to tighten today. She suddenly said, normal. You're not surprised at all. Structure determines the outcome. She gave a bitter smile. You calculated everything long ago. I only look at financial reports. She said nothing more. When she reached the door, she stopped. He asked me to come because he wanted me to convince you. I asked her. What do you think now? She was silent for a long time before answering. I don't know. This was the first time she had said she didn't know. The door closed. I looked at the documents on my desk. Makoto's financing plan had already been delayed. Several partners had begun waiting and watching. The market never makes way for feelings. I didn't take action, nor did I warn them. Some calculations, once wrong, had to be paid for by the person who made them. Chapter 9. When Makoto's financing plan was delayed for the third time, the market had already made its stance clear. It wasn't an outright rejection. It was dragging things out. The terms became increasingly harsh, and the valuation kept dropping again and again. The atmosphere inside Liu Corporation grew even more tense. Both major fronts were under pressure at the same time, and doubts continued to rise during board meetings. David handed me the latest summary report. Liu Corporation's stock price has continued to fall. Several small shareholders have started reducing their holdings. I asked. Who is buying? Mostly retail investors. There's no obvious major player. I nodded. Continue monitoring. At 4 in the afternoon, the secretary knocked and said, Miss Liu is outside. She says she has an appointment. I looked up. Let her in. When the door opened, I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a simple black suit, with no jewelry. Her hair was tied up, and her face looked paler than before. That natural arrogance she had always carried seemed to have been worn away. She walked to my desk without any greetings. We can negotiate again. Her tone was direct. I closed the document and asked, negotiate what? She sat down, her fingers intertwined. The project. Details. Liu Corporation's commercial complex. You can come back in. Conditions. We can give you a higher share. How much? She named a figure. It was indeed higher than before. I looked at her. How much is the short-term funding gap? She paused. 1.5 billion. Long-term. We're still calculating. I leaned back in my chair. The risk hasn't disappeared. We can invest in stages. I asked. Collateral. Core assets. I asked again. Liquidity. She fell silent. I didn't continue questioning. She looked up at me. Feelings can be put aside. The project can continue. The moment she said it, it was obvious she was forcing herself to sound composed. I looked at her. Who are you the wife of now? The heir instantly froze. Her face turned pale. Her fingers tightened. I knew you would ask that. It's a fact. She lowered her voice. Marriage doesn't mean being bound in business. Then what identity are you coming here with? She didn't answer. I stood up, walked to the cabinet, and took out a document. I returned to the desk and handed it to her. This is Wang Corporation's upcoming partnership list. She opened it. The first page had no Liu Corporation. The second page didn't either. When she reached the final page, her hand trembled slightly. You arranged everything long ago. Funds can't sit idle. She looked up, her voice tightening. You're not leaving even a single opening. There is no reasonable justification. I can step down from management. That's your internal matter. She stared at me, her eyes turning red. George, we grew up together. That was the past. She took a deep breath. You're really this heartless? I don't make emotional decisions. She suddenly laughed, a very light, bitter laugh. The way you talk now doesn't have even a little warmth. Warmth doesn't solve financial reports. She closed the document. What if I divorce him? The sentence came suddenly. I looked at her without expression. That's your choice. If I cut ties with him, would you reconsider? The project risk won't disappear because of a divorce. She finally understood. My refusal was not about the conditions. It was because the entire structure had already changed. She stood up, walked a few steps around the office, then stopped. Makoto said you just want to watch us lower our heads. I asked. He said that. He said you would eventually give in. I looked at her. He sent you here to test me. She didn't deny it. After a few seconds of silence, she whispered. He's under a lot of pressure now. And you? I am too. For the first time, her voice carried helplessness. Some people on the board have already suggested bringing in external capital. The terms are terrible. Then evaluate them. That would dilute our ownership significantly. That's reality. Chapter 10. She walked up to me. George, I can admit that my judgment was wrong back then. I didn't respond. I thought he could bring new resources and new growth. And now? Now I can't see clearly anymore. She lowered her head, as if swallowing something back. I didn't expect you to withdraw so completely. It was a necessary step. She suddenly looked up. Do you have even a little regret? No. She froze. The confidence she once had from being admired by everyone completely collapsed at that moment. She sat back down in the chair, her voice lowering. For the first time, I feel like such a failure. Failure is a result, not a label. She looked at me. You wouldn't have talked to me like this before. You weren't standing against me. She fell silent. The only sound in the office was the hum of the air conditioner. A few minutes later, she stood up. Then I'll ask one more time. Go ahead. If Liu Corporation completely withdraws from management and professional managers take over, would you consider investing again? It depends on the proposal. She nodded. I'll redo the plan, I said. There isn't much time. I know. She walked to the door, then stopped. Today, Makoto pushed part of the decision-making responsibility onto me during the board meeting. Did you sign anything? Yes. Then take responsibility. She closed her eyes and continued. He's starting to shift the blame. I wasn't surprised. Do you see things clearly now? She didn't answer. When the door closed, her figure looked extremely thin. That night, Liu Corporation's stock price fell again. When the investment department reported to me, their tone was cautious. CEO Wang. Someone is asking whether we intend to acquire them. Don't respond for now. Yes. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The lights in the opposite buildings turned on one by one. I thought of the first time she stood beside me in a formal dress. Back then, she said Liu Corporation would become bigger than it was in the future. She had always been ambitious, but ambition needed to match judgment. My phone vibrated. A message came in. It was from Willow. I'll redo the proposal. I didn't reply. The partnership list was still spread out on my desk. Every investment already had a destination. This wasn't about emotions. It was about changed positions. She thought what she had lost was the engagement. What she had actually lost was the support that held everything together. Chapter 11. On the third day after Willow said she would redo the proposal, the market gave its answer first. The debt situation of Makoto's company was publicly disclosed. It wasn't a rumor. It was an official financial report. Several short-term loans had reached maturity without being repaid. Interest had continued accumulating, and cash flow was under severe pressure. David placed the documents on my desk. It has been confirmed. I flipped through 2 pages and asked, did Liu Corporation provide guarantees? Some projects carry joint liability. I looked up and asked again. Did she sign? The vice president signed. She was now Liu Corporation's vice president, and also Makoto's wife. 2 lines, intertwined together. At 3 in the afternoon, Liu Corporation announced changes in personal shareholdings. Willow sold part of her personal shares. The price was not high. The destination of the funds was obvious, covering the financial gap. David said calmly. She's saving him. Can she save him? Very unlikely. In the evening, I met with 2 bank representatives in the reception room. They asked directly. CEO Wang, does Wang Corporation intend to participate in Liu Corporation's debt restructuring? I said. There is currently no plan. If Liu Corporation's cash flow breaks down, it will affect confidence in the industry. There are multiple chains within the industry. They nodded and didn't press further. After seeing the bank representatives out, I had just returned to my office when the secretary knocked again. Miss Liu is downstairs. I was silent for a second. Let her come up. When the door opened, I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were visibly red. She walked in and closed the door gently. You saw it? I did. She stood in front of my desk without sitting. His company's debt situation is much worse than I expected. The financial report has been made public. The banks have already come. Normal procedure. She suddenly laughed. A bitter laugh. Did you know this would happen long ago? I look at the structure. Did you never think about warning me? I did. She froze. When? The day you asked to end the engagement. She fell silent. The atmosphere became heavy. She suddenly sat down and covered her face with both hands. A few seconds later, she looked up. He's not like you. The moment she said it, her voice was already hoarse. I looked at her. When you chose him, did you think about that? Her fingers gripped the armrest tightly. I thought he was someone who dared to take risks. Taking risks doesn't mean being able to bear the consequences. She closed her eyes briefly. Today, someone on the board proposed removing me from the position of vice president. Reason? Decision-making failure. You signed it. Yes. She didn't deny it. I didn't comfort her, nor did I mock her. She suddenly looked up. If I step down from management now, will you step in? No. Her face turned pale. Why? The risk hasn't disappeared. She stared at me. Even if Liu Corporation really can't hold on, the market will determine the price. Her tears suddenly fell, not hysterically, just silently. I didn't hand her tissues, not because I was cold-blooded, because I understood boundaries. She wiped away her tears, her voice trembling. During today's meeting, Makoto said I was the one who insisted on expanding. I asked, did you insist? I signed the documents. Then take responsibility. She suddenly stood up and asked, do you think I deserve this? I don't judge. She laughed, a self-mocking laugh. I used to think I could control everything, and now? Now even my marriage is starting to fall apart. I looked at her and asked, what did he say? He said it was only temporary pressure. Debt doesn't listen to comfort. Chapter 12. She remained silent for a long time. We had an argument in public yesterday. The media caught it. They did. I didn't ask for details. He started pushing the responsibility away. She said quietly, he said I was the one who made the decisions. How did you respond? I didn't. Silence is also an attitude. She gave a bitter smile. I realized I knew too little about him. It's not too late to see clearly now. It is. She looked up at me. You really don't feel anything at all? I already withdrew. She stood there, as if she had suddenly lost her support. My father's health isn't good. The board is under pressure, and I still have to deal with his debts. That's reality. Her voice became softer. George, I never thought I would lose. I didn't respond to that word. This is a matter of judgment, not winning or losing. She fell silent. A few minutes later, she sat back down and asked, if Liu Corporation restructures, will you participate? Depends on the conditions. What conditions? Control. She froze. You want controlling ownership? That is the only way to reduce risk. Her breathing clearly paused. That would mean Liu Corporation would no longer belong to the Liu family. I asked in return, does it still belong to the Liu family now? She had nothing to say. Her phone vibrated inside her bag. She glanced at it but didn't answer. He's looking for you, I asked. She nodded. He said the cash flow issue can still be negotiated. Who's providing the money? He's looking for new investors. What's the valuation? Very low. That's the price. She suddenly looked up and asked, if I hadn't left back then, would you have helped me carry all of this? There wasn't any of this back then. Her eyes gradually darkened. I always thought you were too cold. Coldness helps people see clearly. She stood up and said, I didn't come here today to beg you. Then what did you come for? To hear the truth. Ask, does Liu Corporation still have a chance? Yes. Her breathing stopped for a moment. On what condition? Accept reality. She remained silent for a long time before asking, what is reality? Restructure, reduce the scale, and bring in new capital, including you. If the conditions are suitable, she nodded. Then I'll convince the board. Convince them to accept dilution. Better than collapsing completely. When she said this, her voice was no longer trembling. The sharpness of her old stubbornness had disappeared. What replaced it was clarity. She walked to the door, stopped, and said, "Makoto mentioned divorce today." I looked at her. "What do you think?" She paused for a few seconds before answering. "I don't know. Think carefully before making a decision." She nodded. The door closed. The office became quiet again. David came in to report. Liu Corporation's board has just announced a restructuring proposal. Details: reducing projects and introducing external capital. Equity ratio still under negotiation. I nodded. Continue following up. Night fell. The lights in the opposite building turned on. I sat in my chair without any unnecessary emotions. She went from being willful to regretting. I went from enduring silently to becoming independent. The situation was still changing, but the direction was already clear. Chapter 13. 3 days after Liu Corporation announced its restructuring plan, an official letter was delivered to Wang Corporation. It was not a message from Willow Liu. It was a cooperation invitation submitted by Liu Corporation's board of directors on behalf of the company. The wording was restrained, and the content was direct. They hoped Wang Corporation would participate in the restructuring as a strategic investor. The terms were negotiable. I placed the letter on my desk and didn't reply immediately. David stood to the side and said, "This time, they came through official channels. Who is leading it?" "The head of the Liu family signed it personally." I nodded. "Set up a meeting at 2 in the afternoon." The meeting was scheduled at Liu Corporation's headquarters. I didn't bring many people. Only the legal team and the financial director came with me. The atmosphere in the conference room was much colder than last time. The head of the Liu family sat at the head of the table, his face visibly exhausted. Several directors looked serious. Willow Liu sat off to the side, no longer at the center. Her position was obvious. She was attending only as the vice president. I sat down and opened the documents. The head of the Liu family spoke first. "George, this time it's cooperation on a company level. I understand. Liu Corporation is willing to open up shares and bring Wang Corporation in." I asked, "What percentage?" He gave me a figure. It was not enough to establish control. I looked at the financial director. He shook his head. I closed the document. "This percentage is not enough to take on the risk." The conference room fell silent for a few seconds. One director spoke. "What are CEO Wang's conditions?" "Controlling ownership." The moment those words fell, the atmosphere became even more tense. The head of the Liu family tapped his fingers lightly on the table. "Controlling ownership means the Liu family loses its leading position." I replied. "Does the Liu family still have a leading position now?" Several directors exchanged looks. The financial director projected the risk assessment onto the screen. "If Wang Corporation does not enter, Liu Corporation's cash flow will reach the warning line within 3 months." The data was clear. There were no emotions involved. An older director asked quietly, "What about bringing in other capital?" I didn't speak. The financial director answered for me. "Other investors have offered even harsher terms." The head of the Liu family remained silent for a long time. "George, do you really intend to take things this far? This is a business negotiation." He looked at me with a complicated expression. "You and Willow grew up together. We are discussing the company now." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Give us some time." "All right." The meeting was temporarily adjourned. I stood by the hallway window. A few minutes later, Willow Liu walked out. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her expression was calm. "You really want controlling ownership?" I said. "That is the condition. Then Liu Corporation will no longer belong to the Liu family." I looked at her. "It already doesn't." She stared at me. "You've changed completely. Our positions are different." She was silent for a moment before saying, "The board will agree." "Why?" "Because there is no other choice." When she said that, there was no emotional fluctuation in her voice. The pride and sharpness she once carried had already been worn away. A few minutes later, we returned to the conference room. The head of the Liu family spoke. "We agree to the controlling ownership proposal." Several directors nodded. No one objected anymore. The terms were finalized quickly. Wang Corporation provided the funding and obtained more than half of the shares. Liu Corporation retained some seats on the board, but no longer held final decision-making power. On the day of signing, the conference room was extremely quiet. I signed at the main seat. The head of the Liu family signed beside me. Willow stood to the side. Without the authority to speak, she watched the agreement being finalized, her face expressionless. After the signing ended, I stood up and said, "The following integration will be led by the Wang Corporation team." "Understood." The head of the Liu family's voice was low. The meeting ended. People gradually left. Willow stayed until the end. She walked up to me and asked, "Have you ever regretted it?" I looked at her. "No." She stared at me for several seconds. as if confirming my answer. Not even once. No. She nodded. I understand. She said nothing else. I walked out of the conference room. The lights in the hallway were bright. My phone vibrated. David sent me a message. Makoto filed for divorce. I stopped walking. Confirmed, I replied. Documents have already been submitted. I put my phone away. A marriage that had been publicly defended only days ago had reached this point. It wasn't surprising. He needed to separate the risks. The marriage had become a burden. Chapter 14. That night, Wang Corporation held an internal integration meeting. I sat at the head of the table and spoke. Re-evaluate all Liu Corporation projects. Cut the loss-making sectors. Keep the core assets. The team quickly took notes. This time, I was no longer standing behind Liu Corporation. I was standing in front of it. When the meeting ended, David asked me, CEO Wang, should we communicate with Miss Liu about the future arrangements? No special treatment is needed. Understood. The night grew darker. I returned to my office. The glass curtain wall opposite me reflected the city lights. The Liu Corporation sign was still hanging on the rooftop, but the ownership structure had already changed. My phone vibrated again. It was Willow. He filed for divorce. I looked at the message but didn't reply immediately. A few minutes later, she sent another one. It happened so quickly, I replied. Review the terms carefully before signing. There was a long pause. Thank you. I put down my phone. There was nothing more to say. She went from being the person at the center of everything to a bystander, and I went from being her fiancé to the person in control. None of this happened because of emotions. It was simply the result of the choices that had been made. Chapter 15. 1 year later, the Liu Corporation sign was still there, but the ownership structure had completely changed. Wang Corporation became the controlling shareholder. The integration was complete, and the business lines had been reduced to 3 core sectors. Loss-making assets were cleared out, the personnel structure was adjusted, and the financial statements were clean. I sat in the chairman's office and signed the final annual audit report. The financial director stood beside me. Liu Corporation achieved positive cash flow for the first time this year. Profit margin. Low, but healthy. I nodded. Maintain the pace. After he left, the secretary came in to report. Makoto's bankruptcy liquidation process has been completed. I didn't stop writing. Personally, his assets have been frozen, and his company has been dissolved. Got it. This year, he went from appearing frequently in public to complete silence. The process wasn't very long. Capital had no patience for failures. At 3 in the afternoon, I received a call from Willow. Her number hadn't appeared on my phone voluntarily for a long time. Do you have time to meet? Location. The old place. She meant the cafe we used to visit often. I arrived on time. She was already sitting by the window. No high heels. No elaborate makeup. Just a simple white shirt, with her hair falling over her shoulders. She looked up at me and smiled slightly. Long time no see. Yeah. I sat down. The waiter came over, and she ordered a black coffee. He signed the papers. I heard. It was more straightforward than I expected. For him, it was cutting his losses. She nodded. I used to think marriage was a bargaining chip, and now, it's a cost. There was no emotion in her voice when she said it. Liu Corporation is doing well now. She continued. The board has a high opinion of you. That's the team's work. You've become calmer. Position determines that. She looked at me and continued. I left management. I know. Now I'm just an ordinary shareholder. That's good. She smiled. Aren't you even curious how I've been living this past year? If you want to talk, you can. She lowered her head, her fingers rubbing the edge of the cup. When I first got divorced, it was difficult for me to accept. Later, I realized it had already been broken for a long time. Did you ever hate me? I looked at her and answered. No. She raised her head. Really? Emotions don't solve problems. She was silent for a moment. I always thought you were too rational. Do you still think that now? Now I think I was too impulsive. There weren't many people in the cafe. The sunlight came through the window and fell onto the table. She suddenly asked. If I hadn't taken that step back then, what would have happened to us? We'll never know. She smiled. You still won't make assumptions. Assumptions are meaningless. She nodded. This past year, I realized one thing. What? No one will pay for another person's impulsiveness. She spoke slowly. I didn't respond. She continued. Back then, I thought I could have both love and resources. In the end, I lost both. And now? Now I've learned to read financial reports. She looked up at me. You taught me that. I smiled faintly. I didn't teach you. You taught me through your actions. She took a sip of coffee. I came here to say I'm sorry. No need. I owe you an explanation. It's already in the past. She fell silent. A few seconds later, she asked. Are you happy now? I thought for a moment before answering. I'm clear-headed. She looked at me with a complicated expression. You really never regretted it? No. She nodded. Then that's good. There was no argument between us. No accusations. Only the traces left behind by time. She stood up. If the company needs anything in the future, I'll cooperate. Follow the procedures. She smiled. You really don't leave any room for feelings. Business and personal matters should be separate. She said nothing more. Chapter 16. When she walked out of the cafe, there was no sound of high heels. Her footsteps were light. I stood at the entrance and watched her get into the car. The car drove away without her looking back. That night, I returned to the office. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the familiar glass curtain wall. The city was brightly lit. Over the past year, the entire situation had completely changed. Liu Corporation had become a subsidiary under Wang Corporation. Makoto had left the stage. Willow had moved from the center to the edge. And I was still sitting in this office, having lost nothing. My phone vibrated. A work message. I replied and put down my phone. The night outside the window was deep. My reflection appeared in the glass. No ripples. No regrets. Her choice to leave back then was her freedom. My choice to withdraw the funds was my right. Every outcome came from the decisions made at that time. No one should have to bear the consequences of someone else's impulsiveness. And no one will wait forever in the same place for someone to turn back. I turned off the office lights. The elevator doors slowly closed. There was no winner or loser in this game. Only clarity.